Let's learn how to research clothing for the 1840s. Good everyone, my name is Caitlin, and on this channel I teach old-fashioned sewing skills and we try to copy originals whenever we can. If you're a returning viewer, thank you so much for coming back, and if you're new here, hi, welcome. I have 20 plus years experience in sewing and 20 plus years experience within living history as a hobby and sort of a profession for like half a year, and I'm so glad you joined me today. So I no longer work in the museum setting, however I do keep a small collection of original clothing that I study and that I use to teach others how to make their own reproduction clothing using authentic 19th and 20th century techniques as appropriate for the garment that we're making. We are starting a new series today that I'm very excited for. So we're going to take a decade, a year, or a time frame for a year, and we're going to each month dive into detail to discuss how to get started in that decade when making historical clothing, how to adjust your persona, primary sources to use, and even activities of that time period to keep yourselves and others busy, etc. So now we're saying 1840s for this year, but of course history could not be as kind to us as to make clothes change drastically in the year 1840 and change again drastically in 1850, to make it nice and even for us. So this is really going to be about 1843 to about 1853 to maybe 1854. I am doing this to benefit the female living historian or someone who dresses up and puts on the persona of a person of a particular time frame, in this instance 1843 through the very early 1850s, in order to educate the public about historical life. I will forewarn you, I do heavily focus on the American South because I do live in Texas, but I will try to encompass at least the United States in my research and note any changes and trends I notice between areas. I'm not going to be the best for researching other places like Australia or England or Europe. I'm probably not your best resource for that, but you might find some things to help you in this. And I will try to give you sources when I find them. Those are just not, but they're not off the top of my head because I don't typically look for those types of sources, if that makes sense. Also, it was kind of a toss-up for me whether to start with 1840s, which I don't really know much about, but I am starting to research, or 1860s, which I have been studying for years and I have a ton of information on. An 1860s version would probably be more thorough, but because I'm needing to research for the 1840s, I decided for better or for worse to begin with this, and we'll just learn alongside each other. So for this particular episode, our very first episode, and I'll give you a timeline of what each episode in this series is going to be in a little bit, but this episode is going to be about finding primary sources. So researching for your impression, where to find the primary sources, and ones I have found useful. So let's not waste any time and get started, shall we? We're going to start with diaries. I am a huge fan of diaries for research because you get the most random yet very useful information in them. A few I found that are online and free were Miss Fanny Chapman, who unfortunately ends at 1841, but I will still link it in the description. Unless you are 3 years old, however, you did live in the 1830s, so it's good information about what you would have known in the background and how you grew up. Because knowing your persona's history is important, especially if you're doing first person. Not as much if you're doing third person, but if you are doing first person interpretation, then knowing your history would be important. For those across the pond, I did find the online diary of Louisa Clifton, which is 1840 to 1841 again, which chronicles Miss Clifton's journey from London, England to Western Australia and her adventures in settling in Australia. I thought that was interesting. If you're into Western USA stuff and maybe Mormon stuff, BYU has Emmeline B. Wells' diaries online. Her first volume, volume 1, covers 1844 to 1846. BYU also has several other women's diaries online for free, including Mary Jane Dilworth Hammond, writing from the Sandwich Islands in 1853 to 1855. But most of the diaries they have are men's, which is fine if that's what you're researching. That's just not what we're researching for this video. White House History, issue 33, has a 2-year diary of Elizabeth L.C. Dixon, commencing on her honeymoon and chronicling her adventures in Washington, D.C. in the mid and late 1840s. And all the diaries mentioned again so far are entirely online, and therefore they are free to read, although not all of them have been transcribed, so have fun reading the 19th century handwriting and their creative spelling. Again, spelling and penmanship varies by author. So now we're going to start with what I call compilations, which are not primary sources necessarily, but they kind of are. So the meat of the book is primary documentation. So like commentary books, that publish, so think like commentary books that publish diaries and letters and memoirs, but they also include the modern author's thoughts and opinions. And I hesitate with the compilation books. Sometimes they're more excerpts that were then chosen to further the author's agenda instead of just straight 19th century text, which is what I would prefer. Also, I find a lot of editors like to put their commentary, which I do not appreciate, Rob Researching. Thank you very much. Please, I just want the straight original text. So they can be great with very good information, but if the author or editor has a lot of thoughts, I skip over those. I will only, if I get a compilation, I will only read the primary documentation. I will not read any commentary. I don't want their thoughts and their worldview to influence how I am reading the 19th century thoughts. I might go in later after I've formed my own opinions and then gone back. But even then, sometimes these authors are very interested in a particular person or time frame, but they don't know like broader scale things, so they'll just insert opinions that may or may not be factually true. It's a slippery slope. So starting with the ones that are on my wish list but I don't currently own, because again, 1840 is a very new time period. So these may or may not have fantastic information, but they appear to cover what we're talking about. So I'm going to mention them. Covered Wagon Women is a compilation of various diaries of women in the American West, 1840 to 1849. It's on my list of books to buy. So Covered Wagon Women is a multi-volume, with volume 1 being 1840 to 1849, volume 2 is 1850, volume 3 is 1851, volume 4 is 1852, specifically on the California Trail. Volume 5 is 1852 on the Oregon Trail, and volume 6 is 1853 to 1854. So I do have the full set of this on my Christmas list, and I am filming this before Christmas. So it's possible by the time this video airs that I actually do have this set. I guess we'll see. Other compilations I have found at several libraries as reference only were American Women Diaries. There's both a New England volume and a Southern volume. They are compilations and do cover more than the 1840s, but I did check that there were diaries during the 1843 to 1853 date range. Hardship and Hope, Missouri Women Writing About Their Lives, 1820 to 1920 is another compilation. Ho for California, Women's Overland Diaries from the Huntington Library, Overland in 1846, is a 2-volume set of diary and letters. Not all of them are specifically women, but even though I don't often say it, men do have good thoughts about their own lives and how they interact with women. So it's not like they're completely useless to us. They're just, if you're studying women, they're not as good as going to the women, I guess. Private Pages of Diaries of American Women, 1830s to 1970s, that is specifically women though. So now for the compilations that I do own. Autobiography of a Spoon, which is the life about Sarah Ann Gross Wharton in Brazoria County, Texas. It covers far more than the 1840s. It's literally an autobiography, but it does have information about that. More Texas-specific resources that I have are Memoirs of Mary Ann Maverick, Recollections of Early Texas, the Memoirs of John Holland Jenkins, Maria Von Vulture's Corpus Christi, Letters from South Texas, 1849 to 1879, and Victorian Lady on the Texas Frontier, Diary of Anne Rainey Coleman of Whitehaven. Non-Texas specific resources I have are So Much to Be Done, which is a compilation we have studied before. It does include several more Western U.S. sources and diaries. The Alexander Letters from Georgia and the Dress Diary of Mrs. Ann Sykes. So another set of sources I don't often use, but I think would be great if you can find them at libraries or use for free, and these are bibliographies, which is basically the purpose of this video. It's a compilation of sources that you can then go look for. So the problem with these is all the books that are mentioned are going to be published really in the 1980s or before, which means anything published after the 1890s or anything transcribed after 1990 won't be in the bibliographies. But it would help you find some obscure sources. So one I think would be very interesting that probably focuses a little bit before our time period is Women in the British Empire, an Annotated Guide to Sources, which is a compilation of sources for women that helped colonize the British Empire, which I think would be a fun reference. The Published Diaries and Letters of American Women, an Annotated Bibliography, would be a good one for basically most time periods in America. Personal Writings by Women to 1900, a bibliography of American and British writers. If you're into researching female writers pre-1900, that sounds like a good one. If you're in Britain, there is British Women Diaries, a descriptive bibliography of the selected 19th century women's manuscript diaries. And then more American ones would include annotated bibliography of published women diaries, Platte River Road narratives, and descriptive bibliography of travel over the Great Central Overland route to Oregon, California, Utah, Colorado, Montana, and other western states and territories, 1812 to 1866, which is a long title. It makes me happy because it reminds me of 19th and 18th century titles, but they're very long titles, like paragraphs, especially for nonfiction books. Personal accounts of events, travels, and everyday life in America, and annotated bibliography, and also American diaries and annotated bibliography for American diaries written prior to the year 1861. Although I wouldn't generally purchase these because they're not really anything, they're not going to hold any information for you other than, here, go buy all these books. If you can find them for free at a library or a university, and you can literally either write down all the books or take pictures of all the pages so you can then go look for the actual diaries, those would be extremely helpful. And I do plan on doing that as soon as I find some in my area. So let's move on to clothing research. So starting with fashion magazines, or really ladies magazines. We like to call them fashion magazines, but they were really called ladies magazines in the period. There isn't much fashion information in the 1840s and early 1850s ladies magazines, unfortunately, other than a fashion plate and a few projects here or there and patterns, and a page or two on fashions at the end. The most popular ladies magazines in this time period would be Godey's Ladies Book. You can find all of the issues for our time period on Hattie Trust for free online, and you can read them. You can download the pages, you can search inside, etc. Another ladies magazine that began in 1842 and quickly rose to rival Godey by the 1860s would be Peterson's Magazine. All volumes from 1842 and 1852 are also on Hattie Trust and therefore free as well. There are other magazines, many are French from this time period, which is great if you speak French, which I do not. And I'm going to butcher these names, but Le Bon Temps, Journal des Modes, Le Follet. I'm not going to read any more of them. The only two British ones that I actually know of would be the Englishwoman's Domestic Magazine, which didn't start until 1852, so it's not really helpful. And then Blackwood's Ladies Magazine, which is the English reprint of Le Bon Temps, the French one. But those are great resources. You'll occasionally find patterns, embroidery designs. There's lots of stories in there, poetry, things to read. It is on my eventual list of things to do, but I have reproduced Godey's Ladies books before from my own collection to where they actually look brand new. You can actually bring them to events, and that is on my list of one day to do. And I might actually start with the 1840s, considering we're doing the 1840s. Maybe that's what I need to do. Maybe every month I reproduce one book. I think that's doable, and at the end of the year I can make them available. We might look into that. And then I have to decide whether I'm doing Godey's or Peterson's. I'll figure it out. Maybe that's something I can do as well. We'll have to see. But yes, I do highly recommend ladies magazines. There's also the Ladies Companion, which has really good needlework patterns, and I found that on Google Books as well. So from ladies magazines, let's talk dressmaking and clothing manuals of the 1840s. I believe in free, accessible resources, so all the ones I will share are on Google Books for free online. The Art of Dressmaking, containing plain directions and simple language for the fitting from the fitting of the pattern to the finish of the dress, in 1849. The Ladies' Handbook of Millinery and Dressmaking, published in 1843 and also in 1844. The Handbook of Dressmaking in 1845, and the Guide to Trade, Dressmaker and Milliner, 1845, are all ones that I personally use or have used in the past. If you're dressing small children, the Ladies' Handbook of Baby Linen, containing plain and ample instructions for the preparation of the infant's wardrobe, is 1843, and it is an excellent resource. We are really only speaking on dressing women in this time around, although eventually I would like to circle back around, at least do 6 months, maybe a year on children and infants, and maybe if I can get Red's help, we can do men 1 year. But we're going to cycle through all my time periods and all my little decades before we get to that. For women, before we get to that. So it'll be quite a ways down the road. But until that happens, I will just casually drop some infant and children's resources when I can, but it won't be a focus. So let's now look at craft books. We will revisit this subject when we do a whole video on keeping yourself and others busy at events, which yes, will be a video in the series. 1843 to 1849 is the time frame for books on needlework, and there's dozens for free online. Put knitting in advanced Google Books and set the date range from 1842 to 1852, and just enjoy the resources. I mean, if you need help navigating Google Books, I do have a video on that, and I will link that above for you. But to get started, there is the Work Table Magazine of Church and Decorative Needlework of 1847, Exercises in Knitting, 1846, the Illustrated Knitting and Crochet Book in 1846, The Comprehensive Knitting Book in 1849, A Guide to Knitting, Netting, and Crochet by the authors A Guide to Fancy Needlework in 1844, The New Guide to Knitting and Crochet, 2nd edition in 1847, The Ladies' Book of Useful and Ornamental Knitting and Netting Work in 1847, The Ladies' Handbook of Knitting, Netting, and Crochet in 1842, Directions for Plain Knitting for the Working Classes in Schools in 1846, The Ladies' Pocketbook of Useful and Ornamental Knitting in 1847, The Practical Companion to the Work Table, 1845, The Lady's Assistant for Executing Useful and Fancy Designs in Knitting, Netting, and Crochet Work, 1845, Me's Companion to the Work Table containing selections in knitting, netting, and crochet work, 1844, and the Illuminated Book of Needlework comprising knitting, netting, crochet, and embroidery in volumes 1 and 2, 1847. For embroidery books, again, there are more, but just to name a few here, A Guide to Fancy Needlework and Embroidery, 1842, The Embroideress, being an introduction to the art of embroidery in 1850, The Ladies' Handbook of Fancy Needlework and Embroidery, 1842, and on tatting, there is the Tatting Book of 1850, The Ladies' Workbox Companion in 1848, and Parlor Recreations for Ladies, also in 1848. And very briefly here, I want to talk literature that was published in the 1840s. This list would be good for the reader to pick up random life habits, although with fiction you do have to realize that sometimes it is set in the past a little bit. If you are a bookworm and can find a period passable volume, it can be a great way to keep yourself busy, or just to read out loud even. So this is just some of them. Of course, you can always Google books that are published in the 1840s and find ones that you would like. Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte, A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexander Dumas, The Three Musketeers by Alexander Dumas, Agnes Grey by Anne Bronte, David Copperfield by Charles Dickens, and The Adventures of Tom Sawyer by Mark Twain. So let's now talk about being a woman in the 1840s and what people were writing about women and their duties. So this section is going to include things like recipe books, books on household management, as well as some schooling books. Again, all books I'm going to mention are free on Google Books. I do believe in free resources when we have the opportunity. So research your happy little heart out. Woman as Virgin Wife and Mother, published in 1838, is a tad early, but it is good for general advice in this time frame, although not fashion, so I think we can swing it. Female Beauty as Preserved and Improved by Regimen, Cleanliness, and Dress, also published in 1838. A Treatise on Diet and Regimen, volumes 1 and 2, is written more from a medical point of view, but is still interesting nonetheless. A Treatise on the Domestic Economy for the Use of Young Ladies at Home and School in 1841. A New System of Domestic Cookery in 1840. The House Book, or A Manual of Domestic Economy, 1840. The American Housewife of 1841. The Complete Economical Cook and Frugal Housewife, 1843. Modern Cookery in all of its branches, 1845. The American Indian Meal and Hominy Receipt Book, 1847. The American Farm Book, or Compend of American Agriculture of 1850. The Young Mother, or Management of Children in Regard to Health, 1838. A Practical Treatise of Midwifery in 1841. Information on Common Objects for the Use of Infant and Juvenile Schools and Nursery Governesses in 1845. And speaking of school books, let's review some educational resources. So these you may or may not be able to get for free online. You may have to purchase reprints. So McGuffey's Eclectic Readers were first published in the late 1830s, so they would be appropriate. The School Reader Series began in the 1840s, the Western Primer in 1847, Smith's New Grammar and English Grammar in Familiar Lectures, both were late 1830s. The North American Arithmetic in the late 1830s, Vintage Schoolbook 1835 Geography, and Town's Second Reader or the Speller's Companion in 1845. If you are interested in school books and giving yourself a proper mid-19th century education or early 19th century education, depending on how old you are, and what your persona would have known, the University of Pittsburgh has a whole bibliography on 19th century school books online that I will link for you. So those are some of the basic ones. We'll touch on mannerisms, etiquette, and eating habits of each class when we get to videos in each of those. And then of course, let's not forget about resources such as Ancestry, Family Search, county records, museums, libraries, and universities for finding things like mortuary schedules, census records, etc. There are many more facets of research that we can go down, from farming to plants to pets to furnishings to how to decorate houses, how to travel, and we just don't have time nor the energy to get to all that right now. And that is what Google Books is for, right? So if you have an interest that's not listed here, go ahead and find it. And now I call for help. So those of you who have looked into the 1840s but longer than I have, what primary sources do you recommend for researching the 1840s, specifically ladies' lives and their clothing? Please educate me and others in the comments. I would love to hear your resources. I will compile any information that I am given in a pinned comment along with all the resources I have in a very long document type comment at the very top for anyone, of course giving credit to all those lovely folks who have helped us. So please stick to primary documentation. We always want to get as close to the original source as possible, an original source that we can actually read. It's very helpful to hear, oh, I have this original diary and this is what she says in this entry, but having the whole story of someone is much more helpful. So something like that would be very useful. And before we go, I do want to touch again on this whole series and what you can expect from it in the future. I'm calling it Bettering Your Impression, and again, we're going to be doing different time periods for each year. This year, we're going to be doing 1842 to about 1853, more or less. This first video is, of course, how to research with a list of primary sources, and next month, we're going to look at how to pick out fabrics for this time period. In March, we'll touch on how to pick patterns and also how to draft your own. So I'll go from skin out, here's this pattern, here's this pattern, this is this pattern, here's how we draft all of our things if we don't want them. It's going to be a long video, but it'll be a good one. Then will be how to make a dress, so step by step how to complete a dress with all the different techniques that we use. Then we'll do 3 months on curating an outfit and to include accessories. So one video will be how to look poor, one to be more middle class, and one how to be wealthy. And then we'll have an episode about how to keep yourselves and others busy, where we will discuss portable crafts and patterns, how to entertain children, as well as period accurate crafts for museums or site visitors to kind of do as a take-home project that are easy and period correct. So I want to try to get us away from the corn husk dolls and the quilted ornaments that are at every event that may or may not be correct for your region and time period and time of year. Let's give our museum visitors like real period arts and crafts to take home. So in October, we're going to talk about home furnishings and the non-clothing accessories and how to keep your camp and also a house authentic. In November, we're going to discuss period luggage and how to pack and organize your belongings to travel historically. And there's nothing I hate more than bringing modern luggage to a period event and then having to hide it all event because it's not period accurate, but it's still needing things out of those luggage pieces and not being able to just like put them on the floor. I'm starting to truly realize how important period accurate luggage really is, and I want to provide some sources and patterns for those. And so finally, we will have a wrapping it up summary episode in November where I can answer any questions that come up during this series, etc. So I did want to give you a timeline about how this is going to work and what to expect. And then so next year, I think we'll do 1853 to 1863, but I am open to suggestions about that. But I am open to suggestions after that. So I'm open to doing 1770s because I should have 2 years of research under my belt by then. I'd be open to doing the later Civil War, so like 1863 to really 1867-ish time period. And it's a long way out, but next year sometime I will put out 3 to 4 time frame options in a poll, and y'all can pick whatever time period y'all think you would like after the 1853 to 1863 one. That way it's at least within reason, so y'all don't pick something like 1670s or something that I don't do. I don't have enough time in my life to start a new time period. I'm starting enough this year with the 1770s and the 1840s. I don't need any other time periods. So I have too many clothes already. So I will not be starting a new time period for this. It'll just be within the realm of what I already know. And with that being said, thank you so much for joining me today as we learned about some primary sources for the 1840s clothing and life. If you've enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe to the channel, click the little bell notification so you're notified anytime I upload a new video. And as always, have a fantastic week, and I'll see you back here in the next video.